Are you ready? All right, hi everybody. Why don't we get started? It's just afternoon. First of all, welcome back. I hope you had a good Thanksgiving break. And you're getting ready for the, Crystal's looking at me like, yeah, right. You're getting ready for the final push. We're really happy to have with us today Professor Gabe Teninbaum. Professor Teninbaum is a professor on the faculty at Suffolk Law School, but he is also one of the leaders in what we would call the field of legal technology education. He is in charge of the concentration at Suffolk Law School, which is legal innovation and technology. He is also in charge or director of the Institute on Legal Innovation and Technology, and some of you may have read about this, but he's responsible for the new certificate program, largely responsible for the new certificate program that Suffolk Law School is offering, that's not just for law students at Suffolk Law School, but for any number of professionals who want to become certified in these new areas of technology that are the technologies that are really out there and that are going to be out there in the world that you guys are going out to practice in. I mean, I've kind of missed the boat. But you guys, it's all out there for you. And so what we're thrilled to have Gabe here to talk with us about today is what we mean when we talk about legal technology and innovation, what the different aspects are, and what are some resources that we can access to educate ourselves and to help prepare you guys for as many opportunities as we can as you go out into the world of legal practice. So thank you very much, and he's also a good friend of mine and a longtime colleague, and we're really happy to have you here. Thank you. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving. I'm glad everyone was able to make it today. I hope the pizza helped induce you, but I hope you stay for the talk. So I'm very lucky. So my role at Suffolk Law School is primarily to teach students, but I'm freed up pretty significantly so that I can spend time with people who think about technology and its roles in life. And I spend 3/5 of my week not at Suffolk, but at other institutions, talking to the smartest people who are thinking about the internet and governance, and the internet and automation, and the internet and artificial intelligence, and trying to pull from them what's interesting and what we can pull back to law students and to the legal profession. So today I want to just sort of talk about the emergence of technology and its role in the delivery of legal services, and share with you some of the things that I've observed going on. And then after that, to invite your comments or your thoughts or your ideas. One of the really wonderful things about this space is that it's a relatively new field. There are probably only a dozen people who earn a paycheck in legal technology, but more and more facets of it are starting to permeate the work of the practice of law. So I'm always interested in thinking about innovation and finding innovators who I think that are interesting folks that we can learn from. Up on the screen now is my favorite innovator. His name is Takeru Kobayashi. Kobayashi arrived in the United States in 2001. He's a Japanese gentleman. And he came on July 4th, 2001. If anyone was watching TV that day, you might have seen him. So Kobayashi, to describe him, is a fairly tall guy. He's about 6 feet tall. He's rather thin, too. He's about 125 pounds. That becomes relevant in a minute. And he did something that no one had ever thought was possible. And I want to talk about what he did, and I want to talk about why he did it, and then I want to talk about why it mattered to us. Kobayashi is the world's best hot dog eater. Not only is he the world record holder, but in 2001, when he showed up at the Coney Island hot dog eating contest, he ate so many hot dogs that they had to stop using the automatic sign and manually keep count. Here's how this guy did it. Hot dog eaters are allowed to have water with them when they compete. And of course, they have 12 minutes to stuff as many hot dogs and buns as they want in their face, and the person who eats the most is the winner, as you might predict. So Kobayashi's innovation was, he took the hot dog and he separated it from the bun. And while he was stuffing the hot dog down, he was dunking the bun in the water. And then from there, he would stuff the water-soaked bun in his mouth. And what he had discovered in practice runs was this allowed him to eat hot dogs multiple times faster than the traditional method. All from someone that really didn't have the physical chops that you might expect like the gentleman that he's competing against in the upper left corner. So what Kobayashi was able to do was to take a hard look at the rule and figure out if there was some way to get around him and to achieve remarkable results in that space. Incidentally, to date, Kobayashi's record still stands. He's been beaten head-to-head once. It was by a bear, and it was for a TV reality show. My understanding is he actually beat the bear in the off-camera trial run, and then the bear beat him live on TV. So when we think about what we're doing in law, I want you to keep in mind Kobayashi, who really did something different by just saying, wait, can we reimagine how this stuff works and get better results if we're willing to reimagine the rules? So I'm going to tell you a story about what's going on in legal tech and innovation. I'm going to do it in a series of fours. I'm going to talk about 4 statistics that are important. I'm going to talk about 4 new roles that I think you should be aware of. I'm going to talk about 4 trends that are occurring as we speak. And then I'm going to talk about 4 strategies or opportunities for you to get ahead of this stuff. Let's start first by talking about 4 statistics. 4 statistics that everyone who's about to enter the field of law should have in mind. These are questions that were asked to the information professionals, the people who are in charge of technology and law at the biggest law firms in the country. Question number 1, is your firm implementing any AI projects, artificial intelligence? Answer, only 10% said yes. That will soon be 100%. Has your firm developed any big data projects? Answering yes, only 19%. The answer to that will soon be 100%. Are you currently involved in workflow initiative activities? These are those engineering processes like Lean and Six Sigma that allowed the assembly of a Model T to go from taking 12 hours to taking 90 minutes. 18% yes. That answer will soon be 100%. Managing partners at the biggest law firms in the country. Are your colleagues well aware of what's going on in the field of innovation and technology? Who says yes? Only 4%. Only 4%. That number will creep toward 100% little by little. And every time we get together and talk like this, we hope to make it creep 1 tick more and 1 tick more and 1 tick more. Because the opportunity here is to stop doing things in ways that are inefficient and arcane and ultimately bad for our consumers, and to do things in ways that are more efficient, more cost-effective, allow for more satisfying careers for lawyers, and best of all, promote better access to justice. So let me talk about 4 roles where you might imagine this sort of thing happening. Now, these are people that work in law firms and law departments and in legal aid organizations, and I want you to take heed because these roles didn't exist 10 years ago. These jobs are being invented as we speak. The person you see on the screen is a woman named Katie DeBoer. Katie is the Chief Innovation Officer at Bryan Cave, which is a major law firm with offices all over the world, though hers is in Denver. And what they discovered was that clients were coming to them and saying, hey, I learned about this new piece of software that I think will allow you to do a better job representing me, to provide the same services at a lower cost, to allow us to communicate more clearly, to get a better result the first time, to help better prepare you for trial. You guys using that? And rather than guess or do things piecemeal, what Bryan Cave did was they said, well, we're going to start a formal beta testing program so that anytime we identify a new technology that we think might be useful for the representation of our clients, we are going to test it. And we're going to do sort of our own internal consumer reports so that we can get a good and valid idea about whether this lets us do a better job for people. And Katie became the person who was in charge of that project. And they have a remarkable set of rules internally so that they can get buy-in. Here's basically how it works. If a client comes to them and says, I have a new technology I think we might consider trying, and of course they invite clients to do that, they immediately appoint a team. The associates on it learn about how that new technology works, and they try to implement it on that client's particular project. The associates who are working with those new technologies still are allowed to bill hours for that, right? So the time they spent learning a tool for 5 or 10 hours to employ in a real project counts towards their 1,800 or 2,000 hours that they're expected to bill over the course of the year. And then what happens is when they've used it throughout the course of the client engagement, at the end, they sit down with the client. They don't just talk about how the engagement went and what's going to happen with the next transaction they deal with for them, but they talk about whether that technology made sense. If it does make sense, they use it the next time. If it doesn't make sense, they write up a report and share that information with their colleagues so that they know next time, hey, look, this might work in situations A, B, and C. We were presented with situation D. It just didn't make a lot of sense here. Reed Smith is another international law firm. Their two biggest offices are in London and Chicago. They hired LexisNexis's innovation director away from LexisNexis and said, come on over here, we want you to work with us. And they created an innovation hub. The innovation hub you see there is something that looked like a broom closet before it became the innovation hub. And they said, we need to change the culture of what we do here. So anytime that we have a new idea that we want to talk about as a team, with a client, with another law firm where we think that we can provide better value, we're going to essentially hold a summit. And they hold it in this innovation hub, and they have a person whose sole job it is to facilitate these discussions. Now, this isn't just limited to technology. This is limited to, writ large, new ways of representing clients. So if a client comes in and says, look, we're doing billable hours, I don't want to do billable hours, let's look at some sort of alternative methodology. Let's look at you representing us per transaction and paying a flat fee based on some estimate we've created based on a request for proposals. This is the space that they use to do it. And what they do is they physically gather people together and get to talking about how they can do a better job of representing those people. So for those who haven't worked in the big firm space or haven't worked in a small firm or haven't represented clients directly, the traditional mode is client comes to lawyer with legal problem, lawyer says, I will handle your legal problem, here's how much it's going to cost, and that's the end of the discussion. The legal work gets done, the client walks away and pays an expensive bill, and no one learns anything about how to better handle it next time. This process that Reed Smith has created is being replicated in large part because it's easy to do, it provides a good benefit to clients, it's a good marketing tool, and beyond that, it ultimately has provided clients with better service. So there's an argument that's been made that we've moved from the industrial age to the digital age in terms of how economies work, and that the next stage of our cultural economic revolution will be to a data-driven age. An age where numbers that aren't easily sortable will be correlated in important ways. So let me talk about how that's happening in law, both on the legal services side and the law firm side. The person you see on the right is a guy named Zev Eigendev. Zev has his PhD from MIT in data science, and he went to work for a company called Littler Mendelson, which is one of the big labor and employment law firms. And they decided that instead of just representing people in typical labor and employment disputes, that they'd try something new. They created what's called the Littler Big Data Initiative. And they said, clients, do this for us. Let us into your HR systems and let Zev, who's good with numbers, do some calculations. And let's figure out what we can come up with that's going to add value to us when we represent you. So what Zev was able to do is he was able to look at enough copies of HR policies to determine what terms in HR policies typically lead to litigation. So that when a new client comes on board for them, and they represent them in labor and employment matters, he can say, let us look at your manual. We're going to upload it. We're going to use data science to read the thing over. It's not humanized, it's computerized that find patterns. And we're going to cross-reference that with things like the PACER database, the federal database of decisions. And we can see what things lead to litigation. So when you come to us and we're your labor and employment firm, we don't just represent you when something goes wrong. We help you in advance figure out what we can do to avoid that. And we use big data to do it. Another corollary piece of work that they've done there is that they're able, through their clients' HR systems at big companies, to look at who's getting promoted and who's not. And they can tell based on demographic data that in this given division, people of this demographic aren't getting promoted at the rate that we might expect, given industry standards in your history. That might be something that you want to talk about. So what would happen is, when they detect that sort of information based on their data analysis, they call up their client and they say, look, I don't know if there's a problem or if there's not, but what I can say is that people of this demographic are being promoted at an abnormally slow rate, or people of this demographic are quitting at an abnormally high rate. maybe nothing but a blip, but you should go talk to your manager because you have a legal problem that's happening, that may be happening in the future as a result of this. And data science allows people to glean this sort of information with actually relatively modest learning about a few specific software-related tools. And this kind of thing is happening not just at firms like Littler and Jackson Lewis, which is their main competitor, a big New York firm, but it's happening in the legal aid sphere too. This fellow that you see on the left is named David Colarusso. He was at CPCS, the Massachusetts Public Defender's Office, for the last several years as a data scientist. We recently hired him at Suffolk. This isn't an ad for Suffolk, but I'm glad that we did hire him. And what David's work was involved with making sure that the resources of the Public Defender's Office were being spent in the most appropriate ways by using data. Here's an example of that. People have heard, no doubt, of the case a couple of years ago of the drug lab worker who was messing with results, and as a result, you had a few thousand people, actually 13,000 people, who were convicted based on evidence that shouldn't have been admitted, right? So you had not just 13,000 or so, give or take, people who had a conviction on their record for possession of drugs that shouldn't have occurred, but all 13,000 of those people had a collateral consequence as a result. So they might have gone to jail, or they might have gotten probation, but they might have gotten their driver's license suspended, or they might have been denied some government benefit, or they might have subsequently been convicted of another crime that they really should have been convicted of, and the fact that they had earlier been convicted of this crime they shouldn't have was a predicate to sending them to jail where they wouldn't have otherwise. This is a really thorny problem, especially for a place like CPCS, which just doesn't have the resources to undo this giant tangle. Right? Traditionally, the salve would have been when someone came to you and complained, you would try to undo it on a one-off basis, and then beyond that, you just sort of hope those people age out, or you write them off and say, well, they were probably headed that way in life anyway. Not a particularly just result. But what David was able to do at CPCS was to create an algorithm that undid the whole thing, right? He didn't just figure out who had been convicted by this person and shouldn't have been. He figured out all of the legal consequences that stemmed from it, and then was able to automatically create a series of petitions so that those people could get their records cleaned up, so that they could get their Corey report with that removed, so that they could get public benefits that they might not have otherwise. So this is what the work of data science is. It's basically taking giant troves of information and finding ways to sort it in ways that are meaningful. There's also really interesting social justice opportunities here. So another thing that David worked on is research on a sociological question as to if men of color, particularly African American, were suffering worse results in the criminal justice system because they were people of color, or because they were poor people, and being poor in some parts of the country correlates with being a person of color. In other words, is that guy going to jail because he's black, or is he going to jail because he's poor, right? So through data science and an open data set, the Commonwealth of Virginia makes all their criminal data accessible, we were able to look at 90,000 convictions, which are coded by race and time people are sentenced to jail for, and we were able to determine, more specifically David was able to determine, that it is quite specifically related to race, and that for a African American man in Virginia to have the same criminal justice result as a Caucasian man when charged with the same crime, the black person has to make $90,000 more a year to make the two come to justice, right? And this is how data science works. It allows you to look at big sets of information, and rather than just look at anecdotal stuff, right, say, no, we see this pattern. We can prove this pattern as a matter of science. So the same way that medications, when they come on the market, have to go through a rigorous process to make sure that the good outcome you have is because of the medication and not some other cause, we can do that same thing with justice propositions through the field of data science, which has been used, again, both for profit at places like Littler and at places like CPCS right in Massachusetts for good. Finally, the process improvement wonk. This is Lawton Penn. She's one of my legal heroes. So Lawton ran a group and runs a group in the Pacific Northwest firm, Davis, Wright, and Tremaine, called the De Novo Group. And the mission of the De Novo Group is to look at law through a new lens on behalf of clients. And what they do is, for every client engagement they have that's over a certain threshold, I can't remember what the number is, something like $1 million of estimated cost for the client, they assign a team of process improvement people to it. Now, process improvement, and I referenced it at the outset, is this idea that when you do something complex, it can be broken down into a series of simple tasks, right? Building a car is just a series of people putting rivets in holes, right? If you look at the whole process, it's quite complex, but if you say your job today is to put this rivet in a hole, anyone's going to master it rather quickly. Process improvement is this writ large. So what they do is, for complex matters, they say, what are all the things that go into doing this matter? Now let's break down each and every one of them and figure out, are we using the right people? Are we using the right technology? Are we doing it in the right order? And by doing that, you can realize dramatic, testable, improvable improvements in the rate of doing things, that's lean, and the rate of errors that occur, that's Six Sigma. So the idea is to take apart really hard things and make them into little tiny pieces and analyze each of those little tiny pieces once, and then effectively create a manual to do it every time that way. The impetus for Davis, Wright, and Tremaine to do this was a deal that they created with Microsoft. Microsoft has 180,000 new vendor agreements every year that they go through. So these are the deals where, say, UMass might say, we want all of our staff and all of our students to have access to Microsoft Word, Microsoft Office, and Microsoft Excel, right? The Office suite, I guess you'd call it. There's a contract that's exchanged between UMass and Microsoft for that, and every business effectively has one of those, and each one of those contracts has rights and obligations and complexities, and some clause might be void in Massachusetts and voidable in Vermont and enforceable in California. So when you're a big legal department like Microsoft, you have to figure out, how are we going to deal with all these to make sure that everything is together in case there's litigation or there's a question or our shareholders want to know. And what they did at Microsoft was, when they called Davis, Wright, and Tremaine, they said, well, we'll give you the business, but we're not just going to let you throw associates at it for $500 an hour. You have to prove to us that you're going to do it better. And that's how this de novo group was born, with the idea being that every complex matter becomes one that they break down using process improvement and project management skills to make sure it works efficiently. I'm actually quite beholden to them. Of all the students from my program, which teaches people these specific skills, Davis, Wright, and Tremaine is our biggest employer. We've had our first year that we were in existence, they called, they asked for a student. The next year they asked for one. The next year they asked for one. We have several people now who work out in Portland, Oregon as a result of these sorts of groups that are doing this sort of work. So, those are 4 new roles. Let's not talk now about 4 trends that are interesting and important to think about. Doing stuff yourself, DIY. So, I'm 41, and I remember in college I took an entire course on creating an HTML web page, which was a terrible web page by today's standards. It was a semester-long course. It was challenging. There was a professor and a TA. It was hands-on stuff, and the output was just not good, right? It's stuff that would be child's play now. And what's happened over time is the barrier to entry to build real stuff has gotten lower and lower and lower and lower, to the point where anyone who has YouTube and just sort of a basic level of interest can build valuable, meaningful tools. So I want to tell you about 2 trends that are happening in this specific DIY space. On the left side, you see a screen that was built in spare time by a couple of lawyers from GE, now right up the road in Boston, which is their own internal Yelp. People use Yelp, right, for restaurants or whatever grooming businesses, whatever merchants you use, right? You go on, you say, I'm here, this is the kind of service I need, and then you see crowdsourced ratings and explanations of why someone's good and why someone's bad. GE has 900 lawyers who are able to autonomously hire outside counsel, right? So if you're working in the avionics division of GE and you spot a legal problem, there are a number of people, 900 total in the company, who can pull the trigger and say, we need to hire outside counsel, I'm going to do it. And what they discovered was that they weren't doing a very good job of sharing information. So you might have an avionics office in Seattle and another in Boston, another one in Miami, and they might not know who the best firm to hire was, what the experiences others were having. So a couple of lawyers there in their legal operations department built this WordPress plugin. It's password protected. It's only available to GE attorneys. And what it allows people to do is say, here's the entire list of lawyers that we've historically hired to do this kind of work. And every time you hire one, the expectation is that you give your review, effectively, only to be seen by your colleagues at GE, right? And on the other side, GE has been able to negotiate with these law firms. And they've said, look, we'll include you in this list of sort of approved vendors, but we'll only approve you if you do certain things. And those certain things have charged a certain reduced rate, but also meet soft measure metrics that are important to GE, like do they have sufficient diversity at high levels, C-level executives. They won't put you on the list unless you meet certain criteria. So GE is effectively getting a better deal and helping to shape the companies, firms that they work with by doing this. Now this tool has been used to great effect by the law department because there now people are hiring better lawyers at better rates and they're able to better pull information. And what you see at the lower left in the snowy part of the screen is they're also able to derive data from it. So they can tell quite specifically, look, when firm X represents us in matter type Y, here's what they charge for it on average. So they're able to draw back that information and have data that they can later use for other matters as a result. Now on the right side of the screen is a tool called Q&A Markup. Q&A Markup is at qnamarkup.org. It is a free piece of expert system software. Does anyone know what an expert system is? Anyone know what a chatbot is? Well, some chatbot people. Who's had the experience where they've called an 800 number and you either get a recording that says if your problem is A, dial this number, if your problem is B, dial that number, or you get a human who's obviously reading from effectively the same script, right? Everyone's had that experience. This is how chatbots work. So basically what you do is you say, look, here's this problem that I have. There are a few different options about how it can be solved. And I can, in the form of a decision tree, I can map out all those ways that it can be solved, right? I can tell you that if someone comes to me and they want to know, is this document admissible in court? There's a certain set of questions I need to ask under the rules of evidence to tell if it's admissible. And if I know the questions to ask, I can code that into just a series of yes-nos, right? So chatbots are tools that allow us to take our expert knowledge and to commit it to a computer program. Then the computer program lives online forever and works 24 hours a day for no cost. Right, so I had a student a few years ago who became quite interested in immigration and people getting green cards. And if you look at sort of the decision tree of what it takes to get a green card so that you can work with appropriate immigration status in the US, there are probably 400 nodes on it, right? There's a series of questions, and yes to no to any given question will drive you down a different path. She used this tool to effectively create a guided interview where people are just asked simple questions, one at a time. And at the end of getting all those questions, it says, oh, sounds like you need a form ABC. Click here and you can fill out form ABC, right? So this kind of process is one that is more and more becoming interesting because with Q&A Markup or a tool like it, you can learn to use it in an hour at an expert level. As a matter of fact, I always volunteer to do this. If people want a Q&A Markup seminar, I'm glad to come back and do it. But it's just one of those perfect examples of a tool that years and years ago would have been unthinkable to create. You'd need a computer science degree to create anything that looked anything like it. Now you can do it with an hour or less of training. Next, hacking innovation. So one of the trends that I'm seeing more and more is people gathering for a purpose-driven mission to create something that is of value, typically with teams that are interdisciplinary. So rather than just get a room full of law students together, what if you got a room full of law students together with a room full of police officers, with a room full of social workers, with a room full of computer programmers, and said, look, today's goal is to get people who are victims of the opioid crisis into treatment and out of court. And you just gave sort of a broad statement like that. We're going to spend the next 24 hours working on that problem together. And we're going to devise some solution. And that solution at the end is going to be judged, right? We're going to try to create a prototype. It doesn't have to be a finished prototype, but we're going to try to create a prototype so that people who know something about that issue can look at it, right? And this is the methodology that Google uses when they want to create a new tool for their system. It's the one that Amazon uses. They get groups of interested people together. They say, here's a problem that we want to work on, give them rather broad parameters about how they're to approach it, and then say, go to it. And at the end, there's judging, there's a prize, usually the prize or a pittance, but people get excited about it. At Suffolk, we hosted one for the ABA in 2013 or 2014, which was a dramatic success. We had 3 tools that came out of it that are working tools to this day. And it gave rise to other hackathons. We co-hosted one with MIT. The ABA continues to do them now. There's an organization called Legal Hackers, which is free to join. Everyone should join, legalhackers.org. There's a Boston chapter. There's a Massachusetts chapter, which also tends to be in Boston. But there are all sorts of opportunities to say, like, look, I want to solve this sort of problem. I come with some skill, but not a complete package to solve something using a tech solution right now. But I'm interested in being a team that's a part of that. And it's been interesting to see that it's been used